Hey everyone, Christine here from Serendipity as always. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this glorious sweater. This one is the size 12 to 24 months. I'm showing you how to make exactly this size, but if you want to get all the sizes, you can refer to the written pattern. You're going to need a size 8mm hook, a 6.5mm hook, a 4mm hook, and some worsted weight yarn. For the sweater I used Soft and Sleek, but in the tutorial I'm going to be using Impeccable from Michaels. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is take your yarn and your 8mm hook, and you're going to just, create a slip knot to start, because we're going to, see, it's an 8mm hook. I'm done. It's an 8mm hook, okay? So now we're just gonna create our slip knot, and we're gonna do a foundation single crochet chain of 36. So put your slip knot on your hook. I'm just gonna go over real quick how to make a foundation single crochet. I like using these because they're a lot stretchier. So chain 2, I'm gonna insert your hook into the first chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2. That gives you your first foundation single crochet. Now you're just going to insert your hook into this loop down here. This is like the chain, so insert your hook in there. You're going to have 2 loops on your hook like that. Yarn over and pull through a loop, and then yarn over, pull through 1, and then yarn over and pull through the last 2, and that gives you your second foundation single crochet. You keep doing that until you have 36. So insert your hook into that space again, or the next one anyways. Yarn over and pull through, yarn over and pull through 1, then yarn over and pull through 2. So we've got 3. 1, 2, 3. Insert your hook into that space. Yarn over and pull through a loop. Yarn over and pull through 1. Yarn over and pull through 2. And then you're just going to keep doing this until you have, actually just go until you have 35. And then I will meet you back here to show you how to finish it and join it in the round. So just keep going like this until you have 35 foundation single crochets. And then, like I said, we're going to join it together. So keep on going. All right, so just keep going and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so I chained, did a foundation single crochet of 35. Now we're going to do the last one together. So insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over and pull through a loop. Now we're going to stop here. We're going to find our first foundation single crochet and wrap it around. So we're joining it right here. You're going to go into that very bottom of the very first foundation single crochet. So insert your hook in there, and then yarn over and pull through, and then it'll be a slip stitch, so just pull through 1. Now we're going to pull through the last 2, and then join with a slip stitch to the top of your first foundation single crochet. Now we're ready to work in the round, and it looks really small, but it's actually really stretchy. So don't fear, it'll fit over the baby's head, the toddler's head. So we're good. Okay, now we are ready to start working round 1. So chain 1, yarn over and insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop 3 times. So you have a total of 7 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through the first 6 loops, then yarn over and pull through the last 2. That's your first puff stitch. Now we are going to chain 1, skip 1, and in the next stitch we're going to work another puff. So yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop 3 times. You'll have a total of 7 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through the first 6 loops, yarn over and pull through the remaining 2 loops. Puff stitch number 2 is done. Chain 1, skip 1, puff stitch in the next. Chain 1, skip 1, puff stitch in the next. Yarn over and insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop 3 times. Yarn over and pull through the first 6, yarn over and pull through the remaining 2, chain 1 and skip 1. Puff stitch in the next. Chain 1, there's 4, we need 5. So chain 1, skip 1, puff stitch in the next. Chain 1, skip 1. Okay, so now we got to work our corner. So we're going to skip 1, and then in the next we're going to work a corner. So you're going to puff stitch, yarn over and insert your hook, yarn over and pull through a loop 3 times, yarn over, pull through 6, yarn over, pull through 2. Now we're going to chain 2, 1 and 2, and now we're going to puff stitch in the same stitch. Okay, now we're going to chain 1 and skip 1 and puff stitch in the next. Now this is our arm side, so on this side we're going to want 2 puff stitches. So that's 1, chain 1, skip 1, puff stitch in the next. Okay, that's 2. So now we're going to work another corner, chain 1, skip 1, and we're going to work a corner in this one. So puff stitch, chain 2, and puff stitch in the same stitch. Okay, that's our second corner. Chain 1, skip 1, puff stitch in the next stitch. And for this side, which is the back of your sweater or front, whichever way you wear it, we are going to have 5 puff stitches. So that's 1, chain 1, skip 1, puff stitch in the next, chain 1, skip 1, puff stitch in the next, that's 3, chain 1, skip 1, puff stitch in the next, that's 4, chain 1, skip 1, puff stitch in the next. This is number 5. Now we're going to work another corner. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 puff stitches. Chain 1, skip 1, and then put a corner in the next stitch. So it's a puff stitch, chain 2, and then puff stitch in the same stitch. Okay, that's corner number 3. Chain 1, skip 1, puff stitch in the next, chain 1, skip 1, puff stitch in the next. Now we're only going to have 2 puff stitches on this side since it is the arm side of your sweater. So that's number 2. Chain 1, skip 1, and work another puff stitch in the same stitch as your first puff stitch. So that will be our 4th corner, or our 1st corner, whichever way you look at it. So puff stitch in there, and instead of chaining 2, we're going to join with a double crochet to the top of your first puff stitch. So just do a double crochet to the top. And this will set us up to work the next round right in the middle of that chain space in your first puff stitch there. So this is what it should look like, round 1. And then round 2, we're going to work together, but this is how it should look right now. See, you're set up to begin working your first puff stitch in that chain 2 space. Okay, now we're ready to begin round 2. So we're already here in our chain space of our corner, so we're going to just chain 1 and work half of our next corner into this stitch. So chain 1 and 1 puff stitch in this corner space here. Good. Now chain 1, skip your puff stitch, and in the next chain 1 space, you're going to work a puff stitch. Chain 1, skip the next puff stitch, and in the chain 1 space, work another puff stitch. Chain 1, skip 1, and in the next chain 1 space, work another puff stitch. Chain 1, skip the next puff, and in the chain 1 space, work another puff stitch. chain 1, skip the puff stitch, in the chain 1 space, work another puff stitch. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch, in the next chain 1 space, work another puff stitch. Okay, chain 1, skip the puff stitch of the next corner. So in the chain 2 space, you're going to work a corner puff stitch. So you'll put two puff stitch in the chain 2 space. And then you will chain 2. And then you will work another puff stitch in the chain 2 space. Perfect. Now chain 1, skip the next puff stitch, and in the chain 1 space you're going to work a puff stitch. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch, in the chain 1 space you work a puff stitch. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch, in the next chain 1 space you're going to work a puff stitch. So each side will increase by 1 puff stitch. Remember your last shoulder side had 2, this side has 1, 2, 3 puff stitches. So remember that each side will increase by 1. So chain 1, skip the puff stitch, and in the chain 2 space we're going to work a corner puff stitch. So that's a puff stitch followed by a chain 2 and another puff stitch in that same chain 2 space. Okay, chain 1, skip the puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch, and work a puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch, and work a puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch, and work a puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch, and work a puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch, and work a puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the next puff stitch, and work a corner puff stitch in the next chain 2 space, which is a puff stitch followed by a chain 2, and then another puff stitch in the same chain 2 space. Now you're going to chain 1, skip the next puff stitch, and puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the next puff stitch, and puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. chain 1, skip the next puff stitch, and then puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Now we're up to our first corner, so we're going to work the last half of that. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch, and in that same space as your beginning puff stitch, work another puff stitch. And then just like before, we're gonna not chain 2, we're gonna join with a double crochet to the top of our first puff stitch. And that is the end of round 2. So now you just repeat the same thing you did for round 2 for rounds 3, 4, and 5. Exactly the same way. You're going to work 1 puff stitch in each chain 1 space, and then a corner puff stitch in each chain 2 space. So a corner puff stitch here, and then chain 1, skip 1 puff stitch, puff stitch, puff stitch in all the chain 1 spaces, and then a corner puff stitch in the chain 2 space, and then you're going to put a puff stitch in each chain 1 space with chain 1s in between them, just like you did before. Corner puff stitch in the chain 2 space, and then a puff stitch, and then each side, like I said, will increase by 1 puff stitch. So on your shoulder sides you will have 4 for the next round, and then 5, and so on. So just do another 3 rounds, and I will meet you back to show you how I close up the armholes. So we did rounds 1 and 2 together. Now do rounds 3, 4, and 5 exactly the same way as you did round 2. Okay, so I have finished all 5 rounds. Now we are going to work on closing the armholes. So as you can see, the longer sides are the front and the back of your sweater, and the shorter sides are going to be where your armholes are. So we're going to work across, and then we are going to join at the corners to create our armholes. Okay, so to begin, you're going to begin the same way as before, just by chaining 1 and creating a puff stitch in that same space. And then chain 1, skip the puff stitch, and puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. And we're going to do that all the way across. So puff stitch in the next chain 1 space, chain 1, skip the puff stitch, and puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Just do that all the way across till you get to the next corner. Chain 1. Okay, we're at the corner, so in the corner we are going to just work 1 puff stitch here. And then we're going to chain 1. And now we're going to fold this corner and the next corner together so we can work our next puff stitch in the next corner. So we're skipping all of these puff stitches and spaces in between. And this will create your armhole. I hope you guys can see what I'm doing here. So yes, just create a puff stitch in the next corner space. And then there you have it. You have an armhole. And this is where we're going to work our sleeve onto later. So now you're just going to chain 1 and work across this side of your sweater until you get to the next corner space. So chain 1, skip the next puff stitch, and then puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the next puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. And just do this all the way across until you get to the next corner. Okay, we're at the next corner. So same as before, you're just going to work 1 puff stitch in here in the chain 2 space. And then instead of chaining 1 to join, we're going to join with a half double crochet now to the top of our first puff stitch. So this will act as our chain 1 space here. So we're going to join with a half double crochet to the top of your first puff stitch. So skip all those stitches in between to create your armhole and then join with a half double crochet. And that is the end of our armhole, closing our armhole round. So now we're going to begin working on the torso. And I will work round 1 of the torso with you. Okay, we're ready to work round 1 of the torso. In order to do that, you're going to just work in the round, but basically the same way as you were doing before. So just chain 1, and in this first space you created over here, you're going to puff stitch. And then same as before, just chain 1, skip the next puff stitch, and put a puff stitch in the chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the next puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. And you just do that all the way around. Okay, we're at the spot where we joined our armholes, but there was a chain 1 there, so remember to work a puff stitch in there as well. I'm sorry if you hear the birds, I'm outside. Okay, and then just keep going. Chain 1, skip the next puff stitch, and puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Okay, this is our last puff stitch right here. So instead of chaining 1, we're just going to join with a half double crochet to the top of our first puff stitch. And that's the end of round 1 of your torso. So to begin the next round, you're going to do the same as before, just chain 1 and work a puff stitch in that same space. Then chain 1, skip the next puff stitch in the chain 1 space. And you're going to do that all the way around, just like you did with this round 1. So you're going to keep going, and you are going to work 5 more rounds for a total of 6 rounds in your torso. And then once you have that finished, I will meet you back here to show you how I work the waistband. Okay, so I did all 6 rounds of my torso. Now we're going to work the waistband. So what you're going to need to do is take out your 8mm hook. We're going to switch to our 6.5mm hook now. also known as the K hook. So we're switching to a 6.5 millimeter hook for the waistband. Put that in there. Now we're gonna chain 2 and double crochet in this same chain space, and then double crochet in the puff stitch, and then double crochet in the next chain 1 space, double crochet in the next puff stitch, double crochet in the next chain 1 space, double crochet in the next puff stitch. So for this round, you're just double crocheting in every chain 1 space and puff stitch around. So yeah, you just do that all the way around, putting 1 double crochet in each chain 1 space and in each puff stitch all the way around. This is what it's starting to look like. So just do that all the way around, and I'll meet you back. Okay, so I went all the way around with my double crochets, and now I'm going to join to the top of the very first double crochet with a slip stitch. So for round 2 of our waistband, we are going to chain 2, or no, just chain 1, and then front post double crochet around the first double crochet, and then double crochet in the next double crochet, and then front post double crochet around the next one, and then double crochet in the next stitch, front post double crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch, front post double crochet in the next stitch. So for this round, you can see the repeat is just front post double crochet and then double crochet, front post double crochet, double crochet. You're just going to do that all the way around. So front post double crochet in this next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch, front post double crochet in the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch. Okay, so that's our repeat for this round. If you want to continue doing that all the way around, and I will meet you back. Okay, so I did all the way around. I ended with a double crochet. Now I'm going to join with a slip stitch to the top of my first front post double crochet. And that's the end of round 2. Now we're going to work round 3 of our waistband. For round 3, you're going to chain 1 and front post double crochet around the front post double crochet. And then you're going to double crochet in the next double crochet. And front post double crochet around the next front post double crochet. And double crochet in the next double crochet. I'm sure you are seeing the repeat for this round already. Front post around the next front post, and double crochet in the next double crochet, or in the next double crochet. Front post double crochet around the next front post double crochet, double crochet in the next double crochet. front post double crochet around the next front post double crochet in the next double crochet. And then you just keep repeating that all the way around. Front post double crochet around the next front post double crochet in the next double crochet. You do that all the way around for round 3 of the waistband. Okay, so just keep going all the way around just like that for round 3, and I will meet you back. Okay, so I finished my last stitch. Now we're going to join with a slip stitch to the top of our first front post double crochet. And that was the end of round 3. So now all you're going to do is repeat round 3 7 more times. 7 more times? Yeah, you should have a total of 10 rounds in your waistband. So do that, and I will meet you back here. Do a total of 10 rounds. Okay, so I did a total of 10 rounds, and I fastened off, and now we're ready to begin working on our sleeves. Yay! Okay, so we're gonna need our 8mm hook again. So get that, and then open up your sleeve, and you can see at this armpit area where we joined our sleeves together, you got this one single little puff stitch here in the middle. We're gonna work a puff stitch on either side of this, on both sides of this, I should say. So this is where we're gonna join to, right here. Okay, so get your yarn, create a slip knot, and then join with a slip stitch to this area right here. I'm just gonna tuck this inside so it's not in my way. Okay. Now we're gonna chain 1 and work a puff stitch right here in this space. And then we're gonna chain 1. And we're gonna work a puff stitch in like the area where our chain 2 space was from that corner. So you can locate it by, seeing where your puff V stitches are, and you can see that that's the chain 2 space right there. So that's where we're gonna put our next puff stitch. So, oh, did I chain 1 or 2? Chain 1 and then work a puff stitch right there. Okay, now we're just going to work all the way around like we did before with our torso. Just chain 1, skip the puff stitch, and work a puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the next puff stitch, work a puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. And just do that all the way around for the sleeve. Okay, now we're at our little chain 2 space from like our corner that we worked. So put a puff stitch in there. And then chain 1. And then we're going to work one more puff stitch on like this opposite side right here of our armpit area. So on this side of that puff stitch. So work one more puff stitch right there. And then instead of chaining 1, we are just going to join with a half double crochet to the top of our first puff stitch. So half double crochet in the top of that very first puff stitch. The puff stitch. And that is round 1 of your sleeve. Now we're going to do just like we did before, like on our torso. We're going to work in the round just like before. Chain 1, puff stitch in that same space. Chain 1, skip a puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the puff stitch and puff stitch in the next chain 1 space. And then you're just going to do that all of the way around, just like you did on your torso. You just work in the round like you did before. And you're going to do that for a total of 12 rounds. So you're going to have 12 rounds of puff stitches like this for your sleeve. Oh yeah, I forgot. I wanted to show you how many puff stitches there are. So I'm just going to take this out real quick and let's count. There are a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 puff stitches around for your sleeve. Okay, so just do 12 rounds. Alright, I did 12 rounds. And now we're ready to begin working the band of our sleeve. So we're going to take out our 8mm hook. And now we're going to switch to our 4mm hook for the sleeve band. And the sleeve band is worked exactly the same way as our waistband was, just we're using a 4mm hook instead. So chain 2, double crochet in that first space, double crochet in the next puff stitch, double crochet in the next chain 1 space, double crochet in the next puff stitch, double crochet in the next chain 1 space, and then you just do that all the way around, same way as you did your waistband. Double crocheting in each chain 1 space and in each puff stitch all the way around. So you should have a total of 22 double crochets in this round. Okay, here's our last, we did our last stitch, and now we're going to join with a slip stitch the top of our first double crochet. Okay, that's round 1 of our sleeve band. Now we're going to do round 2 exactly the same way we did round 2 of the waistband. So you're just going to chain 1, and front post double crochet around the first stitch, and double crochet in the next stitch, front post double crochet around the next stitch, and double crochet in the next stitch. Front post double crochet around the next stitch, double crochet in the next stitch. And then you just do that all the way around, just like you did before for the waistband. Okay, so I finished round 2, and now we're just gonna slip stitch to join to our very first front post double crochet. So slip stitch, and then we're gonna work round 3 the same way we worked round 3 of our waistband. So chain 1, front post double crochet around the first front post double crochet, double crochet in the next double crochet, front post double crochet around the next front post double crochet, double crochet in the next double crochet, front post double crochet around the next front post double crochet, double crochet in the next double crochet, front post double crochet around the next front post double crochet, double crochet in the next double crochet. And you just do that all the way around. Okay, I'm at the end of round 3. Just going to join with a slip stitch to the top of my first front post double crochet, and then that's the end of round 3. And now we're just going to work 2 more rounds the same way as round 3, so we're going to have a total of 5 rounds. Okay, I worked my 2 more rounds for a total of 5 rounds in my sleeve band. Now I'm just going to fasten off, and our first sleeve is done. And then you're just going to do exactly the same thing for your second sleeve. Same way as you did that one. And then your sweater will be complete, and you can weave in your ends. And there you have it. That's how you do it. So cute. Oh yeah, I've decided I'm gonna call this Embrace the Change sweater, just because it's a good transition sweater from, you know, spring to fall to winter. It's a good sweater. So this is the size 12 to 24 months or 1 to 2. You can get all the other sizes in the written pattern, which is available in my Etsy shop, which I will have linked below. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, you guys.